I never thought the person to tear my world apart would be my own flesh and blood, but that night, with my cheek burning from her slap and my son standing beside her in our Phoenix living room, I learned what betrayal really feels like. The sting wasn't just from Melissa's hand across my face or her venomous words about me being dead weight, but from watching Jacob, my own son, nod in agreement as she suggested dumping me in some state facility. What happened next, when an unexpected visitor walked through that front door at 11:30 that night, changed everything forever. My name is Evelyn Carter, and at 42 years old, I thought I understood what rock bottom felt like. I was wrong. 2 years ago, when my husband David died of a sudden heart attack, I believed losing him was the worst pain I'd ever endure. The grief nearly consumed me, but I survived it. I sold our beautiful 3-bedroom house in Scottsdale, the one David and I had spent 15 years paying off, and used every penny to help my son Jacob and his wife Melissa save their Phoenix home from foreclosure. $800,000. Gone, just like that. It's temporary. Mom, Jacob had promised, his blue eyes so much like his father's filled with what I thought was genuine gratitude. We'll pay you back once we get back on our feet. I moved into their spare bedroom in their modest ranch house on Camelback Road, bringing only my clothes and a few precious photographs. At night, I could hear them through the thin walls, arguing about money, about me, about everything. But I convinced myself this was what family did we sacrificed for each other. For 8 months, I handed over my entire monthly pension from Northbridge Financial Group, $1,200 that should have been my security to help with their mortgage payments. I babysat their 3-year-old daughter Emma for free while they both worked, picking her up from daycare, making dinner, doing laundry. I became their live-in nanny and maid, grateful for the privilege of having a roof over my head. But tonight, everything shattered. It started over something so trivial I almost laugh thinking about it now. Melissa had asked me to pick up ingredients for her famous chicken parmesan, a recipe she'd gotten from some food blog and claimed as her own family tradition. I'd spent $43 at Fry's food stores, carefully selecting the organic chicken breasts and imported parmesan she insisted upon, using my own grocery money since they'd claimed to be tight this week. When I got home at 6:15, Melissa was already in the kitchen, her blonde hair pulled back in that severe ponytail she wore when she was irritated. She barely glanced at the bags as I set them on the counter. "You got the wrong cheese," she snapped, holding up the container of freshly grated parmesan. "I specifically said the block cheese. Now the whole dinner is ruined." I stared at her, exhaustion weighing down my shoulders after a long day at work processing insurance claims. "Melissa, this is the same brand. It's just pre-grated. It'll taste exactly—" "Don't tell me how to cook in my own kitchen." Her voice rose sharp enough to make 3-year-old Emma look up from her coloring book at the dining table. "You never listen. You just do whatever you want and expect us to deal with the consequences." Jacob walked in from the garage, still in his electrician's uniform, grease staining his hands. He took one look at Melissa's face and immediately his expression hardened. Not toward her, toward me. "What's wrong now?" he asked, and the way he said now made my stomach clench. "Your mother," Melissa spat the word like it tasted bitter, "bought the wrong ingredients. Again. I can't make dinner with this garbage." I felt my cheeks burn. "Jacob, I bought exactly what she asked for. The receipt is right there." "Mom." Jacob's voice carried that tone I remembered from his teenage years, the one that used to precede arguments about curfew and responsibilities. "Why do you always have to make everything difficult?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked between my son and his wife, seeing something in their faces I'd been trying to ignore for months. Resentment, disgust, like I was some unwanted burden they couldn't wait to discard. "I'm not trying to make anything difficult," I whispered. "I just bought groceries." Melissa slammed the Parmesan container down on the granite countertop, the same countertop my money had helped them keep. "You know what? I'm sick of this. I'm sick of walking on eggshells around you, sick of pretending like having you here isn't destroying our marriage." "Melissa," I started, but she wasn't finished. You hover over Emma like some desperate grandmother. You leave your stuff everywhere. You eat our food. You use our utilities. And what do you contribute? Nothing. You're dead weight in our lives." The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. One moment I was standing there, mouth open in shock at her words, and the next my cheek was on fire. My head snapped to the side from the force of her palm connecting with my face. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and Emma's quiet whimpering from the dining room. I pressed my hand to my burning cheek, staring at Melissa in disbelief. In 42 years, no one had ever hit me, not even as a child. "Melissa!" Jacob's voice cracked like a whip, and for one desperate moment, I thought he was going to defend me. Instead, he turned to me with cold eyes I didn't recognize. "Mom, look what you've done. You've pushed her to this point. You're just making our lives harder every single day." The betrayal cut deeper than the slap. This was my son, the boy I'd raised alone for 3 years after his father left, the child I'd worked double shifts to put through community college, the man I'd given my life savings to save. "Maybe," Jacob continued, his voice eerily calm, "you should think about going to some kind of facility. There are nice places for people in your situation, state-funded ones." I stared at him, this stranger wearing my son's face. "My situation. You know what I mean." He couldn't even meet my eyes. "You're getting older, Mom. You need more care than we can provide. And honestly," he paused, running a hand through his dark hair, "I wish Dad was here instead of you." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Emma started crying harder in the dining room, but no one moved to comfort her. I felt something breaking inside my chest, something that couldn't be repaired with apologies or explanations. "The papers you signed last month," Melissa said, her voice suddenly sickly sweet. "For your insurance benefits. Those transferred the house ownership to us. Permanently. So, really, you're living in our home now, and we think it's time for you to find somewhere else." I remembered those papers. Jacob had brought them to me while I was exhausted after a 12-hour shift, telling me they were just updated beneficiary forms for my pension. I'd signed them without reading carefully, trusting my own son. The room started spinning. Everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd given up, every dollar and every dream, it was all gone. And worse than that, I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. That's when we heard the key turning in the front door. The sound of that key turning felt like the last nail in my coffin. I stood there in the kitchen, my cheek still throbbing from Melissa's slap, trying to process what had just happened to my life. The fluorescent light above the sink buzzed with that annoying electrical hum that had been driving me crazy for months. But Jacob and Melissa never seemed to notice, just like they never noticed how I scrubbed their floors until my knees ached, or how I stayed up until midnight folding their laundry after working 9-hour days at Northbridge Financial. My mind raced back through the sacrifices I'd made, each memory now feeling like a cruel joke. When Jacob called me 2 years ago, sobbing over the phone about losing the house, I didn't hesitate. I remember sitting in my real estate agent's office, signing papers to sell the home David and I had built together. The agent, a kind woman named Sarah, had asked me 3 times if I was sure. "It's a seller's market," she'd said gently. "You could get an apartment, invest the rest. You're still young enough to rebuild." But I'd shaken my head, thinking about Jacob's tear-streaked face, about little Emma losing her home. My family needs me. $800,000. I'd handed it over like it was pocket change, watching their mortgage disappear, watching their relief, basking in Jacob's grateful hugs. "You saved us. Mom, I'll never forget this." Then came the smaller sacrifices that somehow felt even bigger now. My entire pension check every month, $1,200 that was supposed to be my independence, my dignity in old age. gone to their mortgage payments because Jacob's electrical work was inconsistent, and Melissa's part-time job at the dental office barely covered their car payments. I thought about all those mornings I'd gotten up at 5:30 to make Jacob's lunch before my own workday started, the way I used to when he was in high school, the countless hours I'd spent with Emma, reading her stories, teaching her to tie her shoes, taking her to the park while Jacob and Melissa went out for date nights that sometimes lasted until 2 in the morning. "You're so good with her," Melissa used to say, back when she still pretended to appreciate me. "Emma loves her grandma time." I'd glowed with pride then, feeling useful, feeling wanted. I didn't realize I was just free childcare, a convenient solution to their problems. The medical bills were what really broke me, though I didn't see it at the time. When Melissa had her gallbladder surgery 6 months ago, their insurance only covered 60%. The remaining $4,000 came from my savings account, what was left of my life insurance payout from David's death. "We'll pay you back as soon as the insurance settles," Jacob had promised, holding the hospital billing statement in his trembling hands. I swear, Mom. But the insurance had settled months ago. I knew because I'd seen the check in their mail stack, made out to them for $6,000. When I'd gently asked about repayment, Jacob had gotten that distant look in his eyes and mumbled something about unexpected expenses. Now I understood. I wasn't family, I was a resource to be drained dry. The worst part was how gradual it had been. The subtle shift from gratitude to tolerance to outright resentment. Jacob stopped hugging me goodnight. Melissa stopped including me in conversation when her friends came over. They'd whisper about me in their bedroom, voices too low for me to make out words, but loud enough for me to know I was the topic. Last month, when Mrs. Rodriguez from next door had asked if I was okay, she'd noticed me crying while watering their plants. I'd made excuses. "Just adjusting to the new living situation," I'd said, forcing a smile. But Mrs. Rodriguez had looked at me with those knowing eyes that came from raising 6 children and surviving 2 divorces. "Mija," she'd said quietly, "sometimes the people who should love us most are the ones who hurt us worst." I'd dismissed her words then. Now they felt prophetic. Standing in that kitchen, Emma's sobs echoing from the dining room where she sat forgotten and frightened, I felt the full weight of my stupidity crash down on me. I'd been so desperate to matter, to be needed, that I'd ignored every red flag, every warning sign. The insurance papers Jacob had brought me last month. God, how could I have been so trusting he'd spread them out on my tiny bedroom desk while I was exhausted after processing claims for 12 straight hours? My eyes had been burning from staring at computer screens all day. "Just some updates to your beneficiary information," he'd said casually, pointing to signature lines highlighted in yellow. "The pension office requires new forms every few years." I'd signed without reading. The way you sign credit card receipts at restaurants. Routine. Meaningless. Except it wasn't meaningless at all. "Those transferred the house ownership to us," Melissa had said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Permanently. My house. David's house. The place where we'd planned to grow old together, where I'd imagined bouncing grandchildren on my knee in the living room he'd painted sage green because it was my favorite color. All of it. Gone with my signature on papers I'd been too tired and too trusting to read. I thought about David then, about what he'd say if he could see me now. He'd always been suspicious of Jacob's motivations, even when our son was small. "That boy's got a mean streak," David used to say when Jacob would throw tantrums or manipulate his way out of consequences. "He's charming when he wants something, but watch what happens when he doesn't get his way." I'd defended Jacob then, the way mothers do. "He's just strong-willed. He'll grow out of it." But David had been right. Jacob hadn't grown out of anything, he'd just gotten better at hiding it, better at finding people willing to enable him. First his ex-wife, then Melissa, now me. A long line of women who'd mistaken his needs for love. "State-funded facilities," Jacob had said, like I was some piece of unwanted furniture to be donated to charity. As if I hadn't spent the last 23 years sacrificing everything for him. As if my life's work had been reduced to nothing more than an inconvenience. The sound of footsteps in the hallway snapped me back to the present. Someone was coming, and I had no idea who had a key to this house besides the three of us. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized how vulnerable I was alone, broke, and apparently homeless in a house I'd helped purchase but no longer owned. Emma's crying had gotten louder, and still neither Jacob nor Melissa moved to comfort her. They were too busy staring at me like I was something disgusting they'd found stuck to their shoe. The footsteps were getting closer, confident and unhurried. Whoever was coming knew exactly where they were going. The footsteps stopped at the kitchen entrance, and I turned to see a man I barely recognized. Adrian Carter stood in the doorway, 6 feet tall and wearing an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw clean-shaven, and his green eyes. David's eyes took in the scene with calculating precision. I hadn't seen my stepson in 8 years. "Adrian!" Jacob's voice cracked like a teenager's. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Hello, Jacob, Melissa." Adrian's voice was calm, professional, the tone of someone accustomed to boardrooms and million-dollar deals. He nodded at me with something that looked almost like warmth. "Evelyn, I'm sorry I'm late." Late, I stared at him in confusion. Adrian had vanished from our lives after an explosive fight with Jacob when he was 22. Something about money, about Jacob stealing from Adrian's college fund, though the details had always been murky. David had tried to mediate, but Adrian had packed his bags and left Phoenix without looking back. The last I'd heard, he was in Chicago, building some kind of tech company. "You don't live here anymore," Melissa snapped, recovering from her shock faster than Jacob. "You can't just walk in here like you own the place." Adrian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Funny you should mention ownership." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "I've been documenting some very interesting financial transactions over the past few months. Would you like to see?" He held up the phone, and I could see bank statements on the screen. "This is Evelyn's pension account. Notice how $1,200 goes in every month, and $1,200 comes out the very same day, always transferred to—" He swiped to another screen. "Jacob and Melissa Carter's joint checking account." Jacob stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "That's none of your business. Mom gave us that money willingly." "Did she—" Adrian's eyebrows rose. "And what about this?" Another swipe. "A withdrawal of $47,000 from Evelyn's savings account, labeled Medical Emergency Loan. That's interesting, because I also have a copy of your insurance settlement check for Melissa's surgery, $6,000, deposited the same week you told Evelyn you couldn't pay her back." My knees went weak. $47,000 I remembered writing the check for $4,000 for their medical bills. But $47,000. "How did you—" Melissa started, but Adrian cut her off. "Corporate investigation skills come in handy sometimes." He pocketed his phone and pulled out a leather portfolio. "I've been tracking every transaction, every forged signature, every fraudulent document for the past 6 months. "Forged signature," I whispered. Adrian's expression softened as he looked at me. "Evelyn, did you authorize 17 separate withdrawals from your savings account? Did you agree to transfer your life insurance beneficiary status to Jacob? Did you knowingly sign documents transferring ownership of assets worth over $800,000? The room started spinning. 17 withdrawals. Beneficiary changes. "I only signed insurance paperwork last month," I said faintly. Jacob said it was routine updates. "Show her," Adrian said, pulling papers from his portfolio. "Show her what she actually signed." Jacob lunged forward to grab the papers, but Adrian was faster. He handed me a stack of documents copies of everything I'd supposedly signed over the past 8 months. My hands shook as I read. Power of attorney documents. asset transfer agreements, beneficiary change forms for my pension, my life insurance, even my small 401k from Northbridge Financial, all bearing my signature. But I only remembered signing one set of papers. I didn't sign these. I breathed. I would have read. You signed the first page, Adrian said gently. They were stapled to other documents underneath. Classic con artist technique: get the victim to sign once, then forge the signature on everything else. Melissa's face had gone white. You can't prove anything. Those signatures look real enough to me. Adrian smiled that cold smile again. That's where you're wrong. He pulled out another paper. I had a handwriting expert analyze them. See these microscopic differences in pressure and pen angle. It's clear forgery. Professional enough to fool a bank teller, not good enough to fool a forensic accountant. Forensic accountant Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. Did I mention I married one? Adrian's grin was shark-like now. Sarah specializes in elder financial abuse cases. She was very interested in your little scheme. The word abuse hit me like a physical blow. Is that what this was? Had my own son been systematically stealing from me for months? This is insane, Melissa sputtered. She's family. We took care of her when she had nowhere else to go. Took care of her? Adrian's voice rose for the first time. You mean you manipulated a grieving widow into selling her home, then bled her dry while treating her like an unwanted servant? He turned to me, his expression gentle again. Evelyn, when's the last time they said thank you for anything? When's the last time they included you in a family decision, or asked how your day was, or treated you like anything more than a walking ATM? I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. Had they ever thanked me? Really thanked me, not just the perfunctory words you'd give a waitress or store clerk. I have recordings too, Adrian continued, looking back at Jacob and Melissa. Amazing what people will say when they think no one's listening. Melissa, your conversation with your sister last week was particularly enlightening. Something about milking the old cow dry and finding a cheap nursing home to dump her in. Melissa's face went from white to bright red. You were spying on us. Protecting my family, Adrian corrected. The family that actually matters. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out another set of papers. These are the real documents. Evelyn signed the ones without the fraudulent attachments. And this, he handed me a thick manila envelope, is a copy of David's actual will. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. David's will, the one I thought had been processed years ago. But this version was different, much different. David never trusted Jacob with money, Adrian said quietly. He left everything to you, Evelyn, the house, the life insurance, the savings accounts. Jacob was supposed to get a token amount $5,000, and only if he could prove he'd been financially responsible for 2 consecutive years. I stared at the document, my husband's signature bold and familiar at the bottom. But Jacob said? He said David left him the house. Jacob lied. Adrian's voice was flat, just like he's been lying about everything else. David knew exactly what kind of person his son was. The silence in the kitchen was deafening except for Emma's continued crying from the dining room. I looked at Jacob, really looked at him, and saw my husband's face twisted with guilt and rage and something else I'd never seen before. Fear. Now, Adrian said, his voice returning to that calm, professional tone. I think it's time we discussed what happens next. Adrian reached into his portfolio one more time, and I watched Jacob's face grow paler with each rustle of paper. Whatever was coming next, my son knew it would be devastating. There's something else, Adrian said, his voice taking on a gentler tone as he looked at me. Something David wanted you to know, but only after Jacob showed his true colors. He handed me a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. My name was written across the front in David's familiar handwriting, along with a date from 3 years ago, 6 months before he died. He gave this to me before his first heart attack, Adrian explained. Made me promise to keep it safe until you needed it most. My fingers trembled as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in David's careful script. As I read the first lines, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means Jacob has finally revealed himself for who he truly is. I pray I'm wrong about him, but my gut tells me I'm not. There are things about your son, our son, that you need to know. I looked up at Jacob, who was staring at the letter with an expression of pure terror. What is this? Keep reading, Adrian said softly. My eyes returned to David's words, and what I read next made my legs give out completely. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the letter shaking in my hands. Jacob is not my biological son. The words swam before my eyes. I read them again, then again, but they didn't change. I've known since he was 12 years old. A routine blood test for his sports physical showed what any honest doctor could see. His blood type makes it genetically impossible for him to be my child. Type AB negative, when you and I are both type O positive. Basic biology, sweetheart. That's impossible, I whispered. But even as I said it, memories were flooding back. The way David had grown distant from Jacob during his teenage years, the arguments about money and responsibility that I'd thought were normal father-son tensions, the way David always seemed to be waiting for Jacob to prove himself worthy, as if he needed to earn his place in our family. I never told you because I loved you too much to hurt you with questions about your past. What mattered was that I chose to raise him as my own. But I also wasn't blind to his character, the lying, the manipulation, the way he saw people as resources to be used. Jacob's voice cracked across the kitchen. This is bullshit. You can't believe this garbage. But Adrian was pulling out yet another document. DNA test results, he said calmly. I had them run 3 months ago, using samples from David's personal effects and Jacob's hair from his old bedroom at your house in Scottsdale. David was right. 0% probability of paternal relationship. Melissa grabbed Jacob's arm. Who cares he raised you? This doesn't change anything. Actually, it changes everything, Adrian continued, ignoring her. Under Arizona law, non-biological children only inherit if they're specifically named in a will. David's original will, filed with his attorney 2 weeks before he died, makes no mention of Jacob except for that $5,000 conditional bequest. I continued reading through tears that made the words blur together. I've left everything to you, Evelyn, because you're the only person I've ever trusted completely. Jacob has never worked an honest day in his life when he could charm his way out of it instead. He's stolen from us before. Remember when your jewelry went missing when he was 16, or when money disappeared from our checking account during his senior year? I covered for him then because I hoped he'd grow out of it. Those incidents came rushing back with painful clarity. I'd convinced myself Jacob was just going through a phase, that teenage rebellion was normal. But David had been quietly tracking every lie, every theft, every manipulation. If something happens to me, Jacob will try to take everything. He'll use your grief, your love for him, your desire to help family. Don't let him, sweetheart. He's not the son you think he is. You sick bastard, Jacob snarled at Adrian. Making up stories about a dead man who can't defend himself. The stories defend themselves, Adrian replied, pulling out his phone again. I've spent the last 6 months tracking down every person who ever worked with Jacob, every employer, every landlord, every ex-girlfriend. The pattern is always the same charm: manipulation, theft, then disappearance when he gets caught. He scrolled through his phone. Fired from Morrison Electric for stealing copper wire. Evicted from 2 apartments for bouncing rent checks. His first wife left him after he emptied their joint savings account and gambled it away at Casino Arizona. Stop it, I whispered, but I wasn't sure if I was talking to Adrian or to the reality that was crashing down around me. And Melissa, Adrian continued, his gaze shifting to my daughter-in-law. Your background check was equally fascinating. 3 previous marriages, all to older men, all ending in mysterious financial windfalls after unfortunate accidents or sudden illnesses. Melissa's composure finally cracked. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. Adrian's smile was cold as winter. Marriage certificates, divorce settlements, insurance payouts, it's all public record if you know where to look. You two found each other at exactly the right time, both professional predators looking for your next mark. I thought about David's funeral, how quickly Jacob had moved to help me with my finances, how Melissa had been so sympathetic, so understanding, so eager to have me move in with them. The grieving widow with a big insurance payout and no other family to protect her. The final paragraph of David's letter hit me like a physical blow. I've arranged for Adrian to watch over you if anything happens to me. He's not perfect, but he's honest, and he's strong enough to stand up to Jacob when you can't. Trust him, Evelyn. He's more your family than Jacob ever was. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this myself. I love you more than words can say. Forever yours, David. I set the letter down with shaking hands and looked at the 3 people in my kitchen. Adrian, standing tall and protective, watching me with David's caring eyes. Jacob, my son who wasn't my son, whose face was twisted with rage and desperation. And Melissa, calculating her next move even as her world crumbled around her. 23 years, I said quietly. I raised you for 23 years. Jacob, I loved you, sacrificed for you, defended you when your own father when David tried to warn me about who you really were. Jacob's expression shifted, trying to summon that little boy charm that had worked so many times before. Mom, please. I know I've made mistakes, but we're family. This doesn't change that. Family. I stood up slowly, feeling something hard and cold settling in my chest where my heart used to be. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't forge documents. Family doesn't slap each other and talk about dumping them in state facilities. I never touched you, Jacob protested. No, I agreed, looking straight at Melissa. You let your wife do your dirty work for you, just like you always do. Adrian stepped closer to me, his presence somehow both protective and empowering. Evelyn, you have choices to make. But first, you need to know the house transfer documents Jacob tricked you into signing. They're completely invalid. Invalid. I stared at Adrian, afraid to hope. What do you mean? Adrian's smile held a hint of satisfaction as he pulled out another set of documents. I mean, Jacob and Melissa aren't quite as clever as they think they are. The papers they had you sign weren't actually property transfer documents at all. Jacob's face went ashen. That's impossible. We had a lawyer. You had a paralegal, Adrian corrected. Someone Melissa found online who was willing to draw up fake documents for $500. Unfortunately for you, he wasn't licensed to practice law in Arizona. Any contracts he created are automatically void. He handed me the papers, pointing to specific sections highlighted in yellow. What you actually signed was a short-term rental agreement with a 24-hour cancellation clause. Jacob and Melissa are technically your tenants, not your landlords. I read the fine print, my heart hammering as the legal jargon slowly made sense. You mean, this is still my house? It was always your house, Adrian said gently. David left it to you free and clear. The mortgage Jacob claimed existed, that was paid off with your husband's life insurance money 2 years ago. They've been collecting rent payments from you for a house you already owned. The magnitude of their deception hit me like a tidal wave. Not only had they stolen my money, but they'd made me pay rent to live in my own home. They'd convinced me I was a charity case when I was actually their victim. But how did they, I started? Forgery, fraud, and your own trusting nature, Adrian explained. They created fake mortgage statements, fake bank documents, even fake correspondence from the lender. It's sophisticated enough to fool someone who isn't looking for deception, but it falls apart under professional scrutiny. Melissa found her voice, high and desperate. You can't prove any of this will hold up in court. Actually, I can. Adrian's voice was conversational, almost friendly. See, I didn't just hire a forensic accountant. I also retained Morrison, Kessler and Associates, one of Phoenix's top white-collar crime firms. They specialize in elder financial abuse cases. He pulled out his phone and showed us a video file. I've also been gathering evidence for months: hidden cameras, audio recordings, documentation of every fraudulent transaction. Would you like to see some highlights? The video showed Jacob and Melissa in their bedroom 3 weeks ago, counting cash they'd withdrawn from my account. Their voices were crystal clear through Adrian's hidden recording equipment. She's so pathetic, Melissa was saying on the recording. Still thinks we're grateful for her help. I can't wait to dump her in some state nursing home and get this place to ourselves. Soon, Jacob's voice replied. Once we get her to sign the power of attorney documents, we'll have complete control. She'll be our little piggy bank until she dies. They were laughing, actually laughing about destroying my life. Turn it off, I whispered, but Adrian kept playing it. The old bitch actually thanked me today for letting her babysit Emma, Melissa continued, like she's not saving us $300 a week in daycare costs. God, I hate how she hovers around my daughter. She's not your daughter, Jacob said on the recording. Emma's not even mine. Remember, but Evelyn doesn't need to know that. Let her think she's playing grandma while we bleed her dry. The blood drained from my face. Jacob's not her father. Adrian paused the video. DNA test confirmed it last week. Emma's biological father is Melissa's ex-husband in Tucson. Jacob's been paying child support for a child who isn't his, just like David raised a son who wasn't his. The parallels were sickening. 3 generations of lies, manipulation, and false paternity claims. But where David had chosen love despite the deception, Jacob and Melissa had chosen exploitation. Why are you showing me this? My voice cracked. Because you need to understand who you're dealing with, Adrian said. These aren't people who made mistakes or got desperate. They're predators who saw a vulnerable widow and crafted an elaborate con to steal everything she had. He pulled out another document. This is their real plan, found on Melissa's laptop. They were going to have you declared mentally incompetent within 6 months, citing erratic behavior and paranoid delusions. They already had a corrupt doctor lined up to rubber stamp the diagnosis. I read the typed notes in Melissa's handwriting, detailing how they planned to gaslight me into believing I was losing my memory, how they'd arrange for me to be found wandering confused in public places, how they'd present themselves as reluctant caregivers forced to seek guardianship over their mentally ill mother-in-law. Once they had legal guardianship, Adrian continued, they would have institutionalized you and gained complete control over your finances. The plan was to sell everything and disappear, leaving you to die alone in a state facility. The kitchen fell silent except for Emma's crying, which had grown weaker over the past hour. No one had even checked on that poor child. The 24-hour cancellation clause, I said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. What does that mean exactly? Adrian's smile was sharp as a blade. It means you can terminate their tenancy immediately if they violate any terms of the agreement. Physical violence against the landlord, for instance, would be grounds for immediate eviction. I touched my still-burning cheek where Melissa had slapped me. Physical violence like assault. Exactly like that. Adrian pulled out his phone again. I recorded the entire incident, by the way. High-definition video of Melissa striking you while Jacob stood by and supported her actions. That's assault and battery under Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 13-11203. Jacob stepped forward, his hands raised in a pleading gesture. Mom, please, we can work this out. We're family. No, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in months. We're not family. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie to each other. Family doesn't plot to have each other declared insane. I looked at Adrian, this young man who'd been nothing but honest with me since walking through the door. What are my options? Legally, you can file criminal charges for elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, and assault. The evidence is overwhelming. You can evoke the 24-hour eviction clause and have them removed from your property immediately. And you can sue for full restitution of all stolen funds plus damages. He paused, studying my face. Or you can give them one chance to leave quietly and disappear from your life forever. Your choice. I looked at Jacob, this stranger who'd worn my son's face for 43 years, and felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete, crystalline clarity about exactly what I wanted to do. I want them arrested, I said calmly. I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and I want every penny they stole from me returned with interest. Mom, Jacob started, but I cut him off. I want them to know what it feels like to lose everything. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jacob's face crumpled, all his practiced charm finally stripped away to reveal the desperate, cornered animal underneath. You can't do this to us, he whispered. I'm your son. You raised me. That has to count for something. You're right, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. I did raise you. I taught you right from wrong, gave you every opportunity to be a good person, and this is what you chose to do with those lessons. Melissa's composure shattered completely. You vindictive old bitch. We took care of you when nobody else wanted you. Took care of me. I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. You stole from me, lied to me, treated me like an unpaid servant, and plotted to have me declared insane. If that's your idea of care, I'd hate to see what neglect looks like. Adrian stepped closer to me, his presence solid and reassuring. Are you sure about this? Evelyn, once we make the call, there's no going back. I thought about David's letter, about his warnings I'd ignored for so long, about the years I'd wasted defending Jacob's character while he systematically destroyed my life, about little Emma in the next room, being raised by people who saw children as pawns in their elaborate cons. Make the call. Adrian nodded and pulled out his phone. I'm calling Detective Rodriguez at Phoenix PD. She's been briefed on the case and is standing by. Wait! Jacob lunged forward, desperation making him clumsy. We can fix this. We'll pay you back everything. We'll move out. We'll disappear. Just don't call the police. With what money? I asked coldly. You've spent everything you stole from me. Your bank statements show luxury purchases, gambling debts, expensive dinners. You didn't just steal my money, you celebrated with it. Melissa tried a different approach, her voice suddenly sweet and manipulative. Think about Emma. Do you really want to put an innocent child through this? She'll end up in foster care if we go to jail. For a moment, I wavered. Emma was innocent in all of this, and the thought of her being hurt made my chest ache. But then I remembered the recording, Melissa laughing about how pathetic I was, how Emma wasn't even Jacob's daughter. Emma will be better off without you, I said firmly. Her real father in Tucson deserves to know he has a daughter. Maybe she'll finally have a chance at a normal life. Adrian was already dialing. Detective Rodriguez, it's Adrian Carter. We're ready for you. Yes, both suspects are still here. 1742 Camelback Road. Thank you. He hung up and looked at his watch. They'll be here in 12 minutes. Phoenix PD doesn't mess around with elder abuse cases, especially ones this well documented. Jacob sank into a chair, his head in his hands. This is insane. You're destroying our lives over money. Over money. The fury I'd been holding back finally erupted. This isn't about money, Jacob. This is about trust, about love, about family. You looked me in the eye every single day while you stole from me. You held my hand at your father's funeral while planning to rob me blind. You let me babysit a child who isn't even yours while you plotted to have me committed. My voice rose with each word until I was shouting. You made me believe I was a burden when I was actually your victim. You convinced me I was lucky to have a place in your home when it was my home all along. The kitchen fell silent except for my ragged breathing and Emma's continued crying from the dining room. That poor baby had been alone and frightened for over an hour while the adults in her life destroyed each other. "I'm going to check on Emma," I said, starting toward the dining room. "Don't touch my daughter," Melissa snarled, stepping in front of me. "She's not your daughter either," Adrian said quietly. "According to Arizona law, since Jacob isn't the biological father and you obtained custody through fraudulent paternity claims, you have no legal rights to that child." Melissa's face went white. "You can't take her from me." "I'm not taking her from you," I said, pushing past her. "You're losing her because of your own choices." Emma was huddled under the dining room table, clutching a stuffed rabbit and crying herself sick. When she saw me, she reached out with both arms. "Gamma," she sobbed, scared. I picked her up, my heart breaking as her little body shook against mine. She was burning up with fever, probably had been for hours, while Jacob and Melissa were too busy with their schemes to notice. "Adrian," I called. "We need to call an ambulance. Emma's sick." He appeared in the doorway immediately, took one look at the flushed, listless child in my arms, and dialed 911. "This is Adrian Carter at 1742 Camelback Road. We have a 3-year-old with a high fever who appears to have been neglected." "Yes. We'll need paramedics immediately." Jacob stumbled into the dining room. "Emma, baby, what's wrong?" But Emma turned away from him, burying her face in my shoulder. Even at 3 years old, she knew who actually cared about her well-being. "When's the last time either of you checked her temperature?" I demanded. "When's the last time you gave her medicine or even held her—" Jacob and Melissa exchanged guilty looks. They couldn't remember because they hadn't been paying attention. Emma had been crying for over an hour, and they'd been too focused on their own drama to care. The sound of sirens was already approaching both police and ambulance, their wails cutting through the night air. Through the kitchen window, I could see red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in stark, unforgiving colors. "This is really happening," Melissa whispered, staring out at the approaching vehicles. "Yes," I said, bouncing Emma gently as her fever-bright eyes fluttered closed. "This is what consequences look like." Adrian opened the front door as uniformed officers stepped onto the porch. Detective Rodriguez was a tall, stern-looking woman with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much human cruelty to be surprised by anything. "Ms. Carter," she addressed me. "I'm Detective Rodriguez. We spoke on the phone earlier this week." Earlier this week, I looked at Adrian in confusion. "I called them 3 days ago," he explained, "after I gathered enough evidence to build the case. I've been waiting for the right moment to act." Jacob's voice cracked from the kitchen. "You planned this whole thing. You set us up." "No," Adrian replied calmly as the paramedics rushed in to examine Emma. "You set yourselves up. I just documented what you were already doing." Detective Rodriguez pulled out a thick folder. "Jacob Carter and Melissa Carter, you're both under arrest for elder financial abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and assault. You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda warnings echoed through my house, I held Emma close and watched 2 people I'd once considered family being led away in handcuffs. Jacob was crying, begging me to reconsider even as the officer guided him toward the door. Melissa was screaming about lawyers and wrongful prosecution. But all I felt was relief. For the first time in 2 years, I was finally free. The handcuffs clicked shut around Jacob's wrists with a finality that echoed through the house like a gunshot. He turned to me one last time, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate, searching my face for any trace of the mother who had always forgiven him, always given him another chance. "Mom, please," he whispered as Officer Martinez guided him toward the door. "Don't let them do this to me. I'm begging you." I looked at this man, this stranger wearing my son's face, and felt nothing but cold resolve. "You did this to yourself, Jacob. Every choice, every lie, every theft. This is who you chose to be." Detective Rodriguez stepped between us, her voice professional but not unkind. "Ms. Carter, I need to ask you directly. Do you want to press full criminal charges against both defendants?" The question hung in the air. I could still change my mind, still show mercy to the people who had shown me none. Jacob's eyes locked onto mine, hope flickering in them like a dying flame. "Yes," I said clearly. "I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Jacob's face crumpled. "You're destroying our lives over money. How can you be so heartless?" The accusation hit me like a slap, and for a moment, doubt crept in. Was I being heartless? Was I taking revenge too far? Then I remembered Melissa's hand across my face, Jacob's cold eyes as he called me dead weight, the recording of them laughing about bleeding me dry. I thought about David's letter, warning me about this exact moment, about Jacob's ability to manipulate even when caught red-handed. Heartless. I stepped closer to him, my voice steady and strong. "I sacrificed everything for you, my home, my savings, my dignity, my independence. I gave you 23 years of unconditional love, and you repaid me by stealing from me, lying to me, and plotting to have me declared insane." My voice rose with each word. "You want to talk about heartless. You let me believe I was a burden when I was actually your victim. You made me pay rent on my own house. You were going to dump me in a state facility and leave me to die alone while you spent my money." Officer Martinez tried to move Jacob toward the door, but Jacob dug his heels in, his voice becoming shrill and desperate. "I made mistakes. People make mistakes. You're supposed to forgive family." "Family forgives mistakes," I said coldly. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated months-long campaign of abuse and theft. You didn't just steal my money, you stole my peace of mind, my sense of security, my ability to trust anyone. Melissa, who had been silent as the other officer handcuffed her, suddenly exploded. "You vindictive old bitch! We took you in when you had nowhere else to go. We gave you a home." "My home," I shouted back. "You gave me my own home and made me grateful for the privilege." Detective Rodriguez held up a hand for silence. "That's enough. Ms. Carter, we have all the documentation we need. The district attorney will be in touch about the prosecution timeline. Both defendants will be held without bail given the flight risk and the severity of the charges." "No bail." Jacob's voice cracked. "Detective, please, I have a job, responsibilities." "You have a criminal record," Detective Rodriguez corrected, consulting her notes. 3 prior arrests for theft, 2 for fraud. The judge isn't going to risk you disappearing before trial." As they led Jacob and Melissa toward the door, the paramedic approached me with Emma still in my arms. The little girl's fever had broken, but she was exhausted and clinging to me like a lifeline. "She's going to be fine," the paramedic said gently. "Just a viral infection, probably exacerbated by stress and dehydration. She needs rest, fluids, and some TLC." "What happens to her now?" I asked, stroking Emma's hair as she dozed against my shoulder. Detective Rodriguez overheard. "Child Protective Services has been notified. Given the circumstances and the fact that neither parent has legal custody, Jacob isn't the biological father and Melissa obtained custody through fraud. Emma will likely be placed with her biological father in Tucson once we verify his identity." Through the window, I watched as Jacob and Melissa were loaded into separate police cars. Jacob was still crying, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Melissa sat rigid and silent, her face a mask of rage. The red and blue lights painted crazy shadows across my living room walls, the walls of the house David and I had chosen together, the house where we'd planned to grow old. It felt surreal to finally have it back, to know that these rooms were truly mine again. "Ms. Carter," Detective Rodriguez was studying me with concern. "Are you going to be all right here tonight? Do you have somewhere else you can stay if you're not comfortable?" "No," I said firmly. "This is my house. I'm not running anymore." Adrian approached, holding a manila envelope. "There's one more thing. Evelyn, The restitution hearing will determine how much money you're entitled to recover, but I've already begun the process of freezing their assets and reversing the fraudulent transactions. He handed me the envelope. Your bank accounts have been restored to your control. All the money they stole, every penny, has been recovered and returned with interest. The penalties for elder financial abuse are severe in Arizona. My hands shook as I opened the envelope and saw bank statements with numbers I hadn't seen in months. Not just my original amounts, but additional compensation for their crimes. How much? I whispered. Everything they took, plus punitive damages, plus interest, plus legal fees. Adrian said, about $930,000 total. I stared at the numbers, hardly believing they were real. I'm not poor anymore. You were never poor, Adrian said gently. You were being robbed. As the police cars pulled away, their lights fading into the distance, the house fell quiet for the first time in months. No more whispered conversations about getting rid of me. No more walking on eggshells around Melissa's temper. No more pretending to be grateful for scraps of affection from people who saw me as nothing but a source of income. Detective Rodriguez handed me her business card. The trial will probably be in 3 to 4 months. The evidence is overwhelming, so they'll likely plead out to avoid a longer sentence. But be prepared for their lawyers to try every trick in the book to minimize their culpability. What kind of sentence are we looking at? I asked. Elder abuse carries a maximum of 12 years in Arizona. Financial exploitation adds another 7. With their prior records and the amount stolen, they're looking at serious prison time. After everyone left, Adrian and I stood in my kitchen holding sleeping Emma between us. The silence felt different now, not oppressive, but peaceful. Why, I asked him, why did you come back after all these years to help me? Adrian's smile was sad but genuine. Because David asked me to watch out for you, and because you're the only real family I ever had. I looked around my house, really seeing it for the first time in months. It needed work. Jacob and Melissa had let things slide, and there were signs of neglect everywhere. But it was mine. Finally. Completely. Legally mine. What happens now? I asked. Adrian placed a hand on my shoulder. Now you get your life back. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen windows, in my house, casting golden light across the granite countertops that no longer felt like foreign territory. It was 7:30 a.m., exactly 12 hours since my world had turned upside down and right side up again. Emma was still sleeping in the guest bedroom, exhausted from her fever and the chaos of the previous night. Child Protective Services would arrive at 10 o'clock to begin the process of reuniting her with her biological father in Tucson. I'd already spoken to him on the phone, a kind-sounding man named Miguel who'd been searching for his daughter ever since Melissa disappeared with her 2 years ago. Adrian sat across from me at the breakfast table, sipping coffee from David's favorite mug, the one with "World's Best Dad" printed on the side. It felt right, somehow, seeing him use it. Any regrets? He asked, studying my face carefully. I considered the question while warming my hands around my own coffee cup. Did I regret destroying the lives of 2 people I'd once considered family? Did I feel guilty about the prison sentences they were facing? No, I said, surprised by how certain I sounded. They made their choices. They could have asked me for help honestly. They could have treated me with basic human dignity. Instead, they chose to see me as prey. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Rodriguez from next door watering her garden. She caught sight of me and waved, a concerned smile on her weathered face. I waved back, realizing it was the first genuine interaction I'd had with a neighbor in months. Jacob and Melissa had systematically isolated me from everyone who might have noticed what was happening. The house feels different, I said, looking around the kitchen that had been a battlefield just hours ago. It feels like yours again, Adrian agreed. No more walking on eggshells. No more pretending to be grateful for crumbs. My phone buzzed with a text message. Detective Rodriguez, updating me on the arraignment. Both Jacob and Melissa had been formally charged and denied bail. Their public defenders were already talking about plea deals. but the prosecutor was pushing for maximum sentences given the calculated nature of their crimes. "Oh, how do you feel about being rich again?" Adrian asked with a slight smile. I laughed, the sound startling me with its genuine happiness. "I don't feel rich. I feel free. $930,000. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, to travel if I wanted, to maybe even help other elderly people who found themselves in similar situations." The irony wasn't lost on me. Jacob and Melissa's greed had backfired so spectacularly that I was now better off financially than I'd ever been. "I want to do something with this money," I said suddenly. "Something that would make David proud." "Like what?" "I don't know yet. Maybe start a foundation to help victims of elder abuse, or volunteer with the prosecutor's office to educate people about financial exploitation." I paused, thinking. I spent 2 years feeling helpless and ashamed. I don't want anyone else to go through that. Adrian reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "David would be proud of who you've become through all this." "Who I've become?" "Strong, independent, someone who fights back when cornered." His green eyes, so much like his father's, crinkled with genuine affection. "You're not a victim anymore, Evelyn. You're a survivor." At 9:45, a gentle knock on the front door announced the arrival of the CPS caseworker. Emma was awake by then, still clingy but much better after a good night's sleep and some children's Tylenol. She didn't understand what was happening, but she sensed the tension had lifted from the house. "Gamma stay?" she asked, wrapping her small arms around my neck. "Gamma stays," I assured her, "but you're going to see your daddy soon. Your real daddy." The transition was easier than I'd expected. Miguel arrived from Tucson at 11:30, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes who broke down crying when he saw his daughter for the first time in 2 years. Emma was shy at first, but children adapt quickly, and soon she was showing him her stuffed rabbit and chattering about everything and nothing. "Thank you," Miguel said to me before they left, "for taking care of her when—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "She's a wonderful little girl," I said, meaning it. "You're going to have an amazing life together." After they left, the house felt empty, but not lonely. Adrian had to return to Chicago for work, but we'd made plans for him to visit again soon. For the first time in years, I had something to look forward to. I walked through each room of my house, really seeing it without the filter of fear and manipulation that had clouded my vision for so long. This was where David and I had been happy. This was where I would build whatever came next. In the master bedroom, I found David's letter on the nightstand where I'd left it. I read it again, hearing his voice in every word, feeling his love and protection reaching across the divide between life and death. "I did it," I whispered to the empty room. "I fought back. I got our life back." Outside, the Phoenix sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and paperwork and the long process of rebuilding my life. But tonight, I was simply a woman in her own home, safe and free and victorious. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat on my back patio, watching the stars appear one by one in the desert sky. Somewhere across town, Jacob and Melissa were sitting in jail cells, finally facing consequences for their actions. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, but I felt no guilt either. Justice, I realized, doesn't always feel triumphant. Sometimes it just feels like the world has finally tilted back to level ground. As I sat there in the peaceful darkness, I thought about all the other people out there who might be living my nightmare right now, trusting the wrong people, ignoring red flags, sacrificing their security for manipulative family members who saw them as nothing more than resources to exploit. I made a silent promise to use my voice, my experience, and yes, my money to make sure fewer people fell into the traps I'd escaped. Jacob and Melissa had taught me something valuable, even if they hadn't meant to, that sometimes the only way to help others is to first learn how to save yourself. The night was quiet, The house was mine, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt truly at home. Thank you so much for listening to this story of resilience and justice. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story right now? Are you at home, commuting, or maybe taking a peaceful walk, like I hope Evelyn gets to do now? Please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts and where you're tuning in from so we can connect with fellow listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this tale, and share your own thoughts about family, trust, and finding the strength to fight back when life gets overwhelming.